My name is Pascal, and I'm 22 years old now, but this event happened 3 years ago when I was 19. It took place in the middle of the night while my parents were away for an important company meeting that was quite far from where we lived. I stayed home by myself while they were gone. One time, while I was at home alone, I looked out the window randomly and froze. There was a tall man, almost entirely dressed in black. He was wearing a tuxedo and holding a kitchen knife. He was standing right outside the door, looking at me. He wasn't laughing at all, and his head was twitching continuously. "Sir, please get off our property, otherwise I'll call the police." I opened the window and told him. The man replied, "Oh, you can do that if you want, as long as you don't look away." Feeling anxious due to his strange attitude, I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. But when I looked out the window again, he was gone. At that very moment, I heard footsteps coming from downstairs. I suddenly remembered that I had forgotten to lock my garden door, and it was still open. I thought I was going to die at first, but then I pulled myself together, grabbed my bat, and looked down the stairs slowly, trying not to make a sound. There he was, just staring at me. He didn't move but said, "I told you not to look away." A few moments later, we heard sirens. The man still did not move, but then he suddenly changed his mind and walked over to me. I tried to swing my bat towards him, but I was so scared I couldn't do anything except scream. The police broke down the door. One policeman tried to arrest him while the other attempted to take the knife away from him, but the man resisted. He was strong, even though he was outnumbered. They threatened to shoot him in the foot, but he didn't care. Furthermore, he attacked the two policemen, and they tumbled to the ground. I ran to one of the rooms and slammed the door shut, but he kicked in the door. When the door opened, I could see his face, and I will never forget that moment. However, at that very moment, the police caught up to him and shot his foot. The guy started screaming in pain. Shortly after that, he managed to jump out of a window and disappeared. The police chased after him, but unfortunately, they failed to arrest him. I never saw that guy again. I'm glad that I survived that incident, but I also feel nervous that he might come back to my house again. From that day on, I always made sure to lock all the doors and windows. As a teenager, I often explored the deep web with my friends, specifically looking for weird stuff on the hidden wiki. There were definitely a lot of links to choose from, but I never clicked on the violet links because I wasn't into that. My friend Latrice told me to click on one that said, "New best friend." After doing so, it took me to a page where I had to make a profile. I put the name Lisa on my profile, but my real name is Susan. Once I made the profile, I was directed to a main page that had categories: silly, serious, smart, and smothering. We clicked on smothering, thinking it was funny. After choosing, there was a list of people with their pictures, both male and female. I clicked on the profile of a guy with the name 5, like the number. He didn't seem like someone who would be a smothering friend. While I was searching through his profile, I received a message from him asking if I was looking for a friend. I looked at Latrice, and she laughed but told me to respond yes. We messaged back and forth for about 30 minutes, and then Latrice had to go. I told him I'd be back tomorrow, and he said okay. Maybe a week went by where I talked to him every night. He seemed very nice, so we exchanged numbers to talk more. Everything seemed fine until I clicked on another profile, and someone else messaged me. I started talking with this other person, but I was still texting the guy, whose real name I now knew was William. The new guy had the name Bill on his profile. A day went by, and he seemed cool, but then William randomly asked me why I was talking with Bill. I didn't know what to say, so I never responded. He kept sending angry messages, so I blocked him. I didn't receive any texts except for a single message on that site that said, "Soon." One day after school, my friend Latrice came over for a sleepover. We got comfortable, went to my room, and did our usual of surfing the web. I brought up that guy, and then I received a text message that said, "Why'd you block me?" from a random number. I replied with a question mark, and then he replied, "It's me, William." He texted me from another number after I had blocked him. I told Latrice how creepy this guy was, and then she stopped me from talking because she thought she heard something. Then I heard a voice. I'm not that creepy. We both screamed and looked around. I saw someone coming from under my bed, so we ran screaming out of my room. My mother called the cops, but they didn't get him because he left through my window, and nothing could be traced back to him. I'm starting to think that he was both of the people I was talking to. That definitely opened my eyes to the dangers of the internet. I would never visit the dark web again. A few years ago, my family and I went on our yearly holiday to Madeira, which is the birthplace of my parents. It was pretty normal for us to go annually since our grandparents lived there. We would sleep in one of our grandparents' homes, and during the day, we would go to festivals. If you do not know much about Madeira, this story will give you a better idea. It's not that a physical thing occurred that holiday. It was just a nightmare that became very real for me as a child. As I said before, I was staying at my grandparents' house while in Madeira. I had a room to myself on the upper floor, which was pretty creepy since my grandmother loved Victorian-style dolls. I was able to fall asleep, but I had a creepy dream that I can't forget. I woke up, and from my bed, I could hear movement on the floor. I looked down to see that the floor was covered in black insects, crawling everywhere. I could not see the old brownwood floorboards, and I began to yell for help. Someone opened my door, and I saw my little brother come in. But behind him was a woman in a hideous purple dress. I had never seen this woman before, but before my brother even got closer to me, I saw the woman force her hand into his back and tear out his heart. I remember screaming in the dream, and all the woman said was, "Your parents aren't here." I woke up terrified and ran into the next room, where my brother should have been asleep. Because it was dark, I couldn't see him well. My anxiety level rose even higher. I ran downstairs, but none of my parents were around. I started to panic more because of what that lady in my dream said, and I began to cry even more. Then I heard my older brother call my name from upstairs. I had just run down those stairs. I told him I had a bad dream, and he stayed in my room after showing me that my little brother was snoring away in his bed. The next morning, my brother told my parents how I had behaved, so my mother asked me what happened. I told her about the dream with the lady in the hideous purple dress. My mother's face became serious, and she looked worried. I didn't know why, as that was unusual for her. About 2 years later, I was going through my parents' wedding album in our home in Madeira while I was sorting out the top floor of the house with my younger brother. I noticed that one of the pictures was ripped in half. I thought it was unusual, so I began looking to see where the other half was. It wasn't in the album, so I brushed it off. About an hour later, while going through one of the drawers in the living room cabinet, I saw a picture of a woman in a purple dress. She looked almost identical to the woman in my dream. It was the same dress. I began to get goosebumps, so I put the album on top of a table and opened it to the page with the torn picture. I started to shiver when I saw that the tears of both pictures fit perfectly together. With worry, I asked my mother who was in the image. All I know to this day is that she is perceived as a witch who fled with my maternal uncle from Madeira. Soon after, the whole community began to believe it. This could all just be a coincidence, but it sends a shiver down my spine. I've never met this woman, yet she appeared in my dreams. I have no idea if I will ever forget the specific details of that dream, especially since I found out more about this woman who is my aunt-in-law. This happened to me when I was 17 years old. I live in Canada, and this situation took place during a snowstorm at around 9 p.m. It was extremely dark outside, and I was waiting inside a bus stop shelter after my part-time job to get home. Although I live in a crowded city like Toronto, it was very quiet that night, with barely any cars on the road due to hazardous weather conditions. I waited all by myself for about 10 minutes until a man who looked like he was in his 50s entered the shelter. He had a disgusting smirk on his face, which made him look a bit creepy. This large guy started making small talk with me. He spoke in a creepy low voice and kept asking me what I was doing out in this weather and where I was going. I felt anxious, but since it was just the two of us, I told him I was going home after work. He smiled and said that the buses were going to be delayed because of the weather and wouldn't be coming for a long time. I took out my phone to check the bus times, but due to the deadly cold, my phone died completely. Then he came closer to me, and I could smell his awful odor. "Hey, you want to come with me for 5 minutes?" he said. I replied, "I'm sorry, sir. What do you mean?" He said, "Let's go hang out for a bit. Don't worry, you won't miss your bus. I will bring you back safely. Come on." I wasn't stupid and was aware of the dangers, so I stepped back and refused, but he kept insisting that I should go with him. I was terrified he would do something bad to me. Luckily, a lady came into the shelter, and the man immediately closed his mouth. After some time, the bus finally arrived. It was me, the lady, that creepy man, and two other people on the bus. He sat all the way at the back, where he could watch me clearly, and I noticed that he kept staring. I was so nervous, and when it was my stop, I got off along with the lady. As I kept walking, I saw that the man got off with us and was right behind me. I freaked out and thought I had no choice. So I grabbed the lady's arm and asked her if she could walk me home because a man was following me. She noticed that the guy was acting strangely, so she whispered that she would take me home. I walked with the lady, and when I looked back, he stared at me for a while before disappearing. When I arrived home, my parents and I thanked that lady repeatedly, and after that, I never saw him again in my life. I work as a nurse in a hospital, although I can't reveal exactly where because of privacy reasons. Recently, a fairly popular celebrity came to be treated here, although I can't reveal who it was due to the aforementioned privacy reasons. Honestly, I was pretty surprised he was coming here, not to my place of employment. But this hospital has a bit of a reputation for not caring well for patients. Not that I'm a bad nurse or anything, but a lot of the surgeons seem to mess up their jobs and somehow don't get fired. This made it all the more confusing to me that this celebrity came here for surgery to remove a late-stage brain tumor. My friend Patricia was a huge fan and really wanted to be assigned to him post-surgery. She was even thinking of asking him for an autograph, which seemed unprofessional to me. Anyway, he was flying in for treatment tomorrow, but my current job was to assist a surgeon with the surgery of a little boy who had swallowed a bunch of toy marbles. I was surprised they decided to opt for surgery, though, because they were previously advised to wait for him to pass them. It was me, the anesthesiologist, and the surgeon in the room. I stayed nearby during the surgery, and everything seemed to be going well until the surgeon slipped and cut the kid's stomach lining open. It was horrific. The smell of stomach acid almost made me vomit as it began to dissolve his intestines. Despite our best efforts, he was dead within 10 minutes. What disturbed me was how unfazed the surgeon was after we failed to save him. He left to break the news to the parents almost immediately. I thought I heard the anesthesiologist mumble something under her breath, but I couldn't understand it clearly. It was something about food. My shift was over, so I walked to the subway to grab some dinner and then caught the bus home. I was pretty tired, so I watched some Netflix in bed until I fell asleep. That night, I had a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare. I was in the hospital, and that kid was there in front of me, but his whole body was hollow, and his chest cavity was opened and bloody. His eyes were gone too, but he still stared at me the entire time, pointing straight down. I finally woke up, relieved to be free of that dream, but still burdened by guilt from the failed surgery. I started my day, and Patricia was fairly bubbly. She spent almost the whole morning talking my ear off about the celebrity. When he finally arrived, she started freaking out and tried to walk up and talk to him, but his bodyguards pushed her away. She returned to her duties dejectedly. Just before my lunch break, I was called into my supervisor's office. He said he had something very important for me to do, and it needed to be done ASAP. He told me to go to the transplant center and get 10 hats, then go to the basement. I was pretty confused and wanted to ask some questions, but he cut me off and yelled, "Either you can do this right now, or you can walk out and kiss your job goodbye." I was pretty pissed he would fire me for daring to ask a question, especially since management would avoid firing incompetent surgeons. I left in a huff to collect the hats and found them waiting in a case. along with a note signed by the doctor that gave me access to a restricted room in the basement, simply called Room 60. I had no clue what was in there, but I proceeded to the elevator and went down. I walked to Room 60 and showed the security guard my note. He looked me over and said, "Oh, this is your first time doing this, huh? I feel sorry for you. Try not to panic if you know what's good for you." He then unlocked the door, and I stepped inside. Immediately, I was hit with a smell I would describe as rotten eggs, pennies, and a corpse. The ground was slick with something, and it was dark in there with only one dim overhead light. The room was pretty big and in the middle. I saw some nondescript blob. Then I heard what sounded like a deep breath, and the blob started moving. I now realized it was a body, walking toward me on stumpy fat legs. I screamed and tried to run away, but I slipped on the ground and fell, my face smearing in the substance. I realized the stuff on the floor was blood, and as I turned onto my back, I was face to face with the creature. It looked like a very pale, morbidly obese man, although it was much taller and fatter than any human could be. It had large curled horns and no mouth. In place of a mouth was just a row of pitch black, pointy, needle-like teeth surrounding a hole. It paid me no heed and reached out to pick up the box of organs, opening it and eating all the hats, stuffing 3 at a time into its mouth. I was terrified and ran out the door, slamming it shut behind me. The security guy looked me in the eyes and put a reassuring hand on my shoulder. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. He told me he would walk me out of the building and that I could have the rest of the day off. Now I'm at home, still shaking and typing this up. I got a text from Patricia, and apparently the celebrity surgery was a massive success. I'm wondering what I should do now. Is this the type of thing I can report? Would anyone believe me? This happened when I was about 11. My 2 friends and I, all of us boys, were swimming in my friend's backyard one night around 10 p.m. His house borders the junior high school property and is separated by a chain-link fence. As we were swimming, I looked over and saw a tall man dressed in black and wearing a baseball cap, just standing there like a zombie, watching us. For some reason, I didn't get scared. I just thought it was weird. I mentioned him to my friends, who both looked over and immediately started screaming their heads off, swimming away to get out of the pool. Their reaction woke me up to the situation, and I started swimming out of the pool 2.1 by 1. We tried to use the ladder, and I was in the rear. As I was waiting, I looked over and saw the guy scrambling up the fence as fast as he could. We made it to the house and managed to slam the door, locking it just as he reached it. This was the back door, which was mostly clear glass, so he just stood there looking at us as we screamed our heads off. I even noticed he was holding a baseball bat. We ran and hid behind the living room couch, and he kept jiggling the doorknob. Luckily, he never used the bat to break the glass, which would have been really easy. He walked away, and my friend ran to turn on the security alarm and called his dad, who was out running errands. My friend's dad said he was almost home and told us to stay inside. We turned on the TV and started to calm down when suddenly the alarm went off. I almost wet my swimming suit for the second time, and our 11-year-old minds decided that standing there screaming was the best option. My friend's dad happened to get home just then. He gave the operator the secret password to confirm everything was okay, grabbed his gun, and searched the property, but he didn't find anyone. We continued swimming that night and never saw that crazy guy again. Now that I'm 25, I still wonder why we didn't just call the cops or why my friend's dad didn't call them. This happened around 2011 when I was 13. One day, my friend was planning to throw a party at his house, so my older cousin drove me there. It took about 4 hours to get there, and when I finally arrived, it was around 8 p.m. A few hours later, we were having fun, but suddenly I really had to use the bathroom. About 5 minutes had passed, and while I was in the bathroom, I heard a crunching noise coming from the woods. At first, I thought it was someone who arrived late to the party. Then I heard loud banging on the glass. I started to think it might be my friend looking for me, so I told him I was inside the bathroom. However, it wasn't my friend. It was a man who looked to be in his late 50s. He said that his car broke down and asked me to help him, but I was already paranoid about strangers, so I simply told him I couldn't help. He nodded and walked away. When I was done using the bathroom, I went back to the room where my friend was. I told him what I saw and what the man said to me. My friend looked like he had just seen a ghost. He finally said that this man had been stalking his family for almost 2 months and that they had seen him from the bathroom window many times. They had asked the police to check the area several times, but they hadn't been able to help. When he told me that, I thought he was overreacting until I heard the same banging noise now coming from the door. It was more violent now. Everyone paused what they were doing and looked at the door in shock. One guest broke the silence and said it was probably just the pizza delivery man. But my friend told me not to answer the door at all costs. I looked through the peephole, and there he was, the same guy I saw through the bathroom window. He had a psychotic-looking face and was licking his lips non-stop. We all just stood there in silence, hoping the man would go away. But after a few minutes, there was a loud noise from the basement. The guy threw a brick at the basement window and crawled through it. Suddenly, it sounded as if a gunshot echoed through the entire house. My friend and most of the partygoers screamed and ran out of the house. I stayed behind with a few others. One of the older kids was trained in martial arts, so I saw him assault the man until he was shot. Afterward, the man escaped and ran into the woods. The whole scene was chaotic, and soon an ambulance and police car arrived. Fortunately, the kid who was shot survived. After a few days of intense investigation, the police went to my friend's house and told him they had caught the guy. It turned out he had been living in the woods and had kidnapped 3 kids, but luckily they were found in time and set free. However, they also discovered that he had already killed several children, for which he was condemned to death. This happened a while back when I was 11. We used to live in a 2-story house with wooden floors on the 2nd floor. There was a slight crack on the floor, so if anyone stepped on it, it creaked. One night, I woke up around 1 a.m. The moment I opened my eyes, I heard heavy footsteps behind me as my body was facing the wall. My bed was next to the wall, and my computer was by my head. My door was always open since I never closed it when I went to bed first. I was confused about why there were heavy footsteps and the sound of chains dragging on the floor. The heavy steps sounded as if they were stepping on the floor's crack. I heard the floor creak, and the footsteps seemed to fade away to the end of the hallway toward my uncle's room. It creeped me out and I couldn't move. I just stared at the wall in fear and then closed my eyes. Soon after, the noise came back to my room. I heard the creak again, and all of a sudden the chains whipped against the floor. That sound was so loud. I opened my eyes for a few seconds in fright, but closed them again. I told myself it was all a dream and that it was nothing. It became silent until I heard a loud smash on the keyboard right by my head. I screamed but kept closing my eyes forcefully. Suddenly, a deep voice started murmuring loudly just above my head. Its sound was so low that I couldn't recognize it, so I started to pray to God. I wasn't honest and trustworthy back then, but praying was the only way to erase my fear, so I kept praying. Surprisingly, the voice faded away. The next day, I told my family about what happened, and they were surprised. I was given a rosary by a relative for protection, and she told me not to take it off. So ever since then, I've been wearing it. However, just a month after that, around 3 a.m., I was sleeping when suddenly my rosary fell and shattered into pieces on the floor. I jumped out of bed immediately when it happened. I was so confused, but I didn't want to check on what could have caused it, so I decided to go back to sleep and just collect the scattered pieces of the rosary. When I woke up the next morning, I told my family about it again, and they got really scared because it was unusual, but they couldn't do anything about it, so they just tried to cheer me up. Nothing has really happened since then, but I always wonder what would have happened if I had opened my eyes to see who or what that deep voice was. This happened a couple of years ago. One night, my mom decided to hang out with her friends at a casino, and my dad was at work, so my 2 older sisters and I were home by ourselves. My sisters were 14 and 15 at the time, and I was 11. After my mom left, it was pretty exciting to be home alone, but an hour later, it got boring. So we decided to play a game. We ended up playing hide and seek. At that point, I was a bit scared because it was 11 p.m., almost midnight, but I brushed it off since I thought my dad would come home soon. I didn't want to admit that I was scared, nor did I want to be home alone. So I suggested we play hide and seek in the backyard, but my sister refused, saying there were no hiding spots back there. "Let's go to the forest," my sister said. When she said that, shivers went down my spine. But anyway, we stepped into the nearby forest. "Go count," my second older sister said to me. I decided I had to be brave. My other sister gave me a blindfold. "What is this for?" I asked. "Put it on and try to find us," my sister replied while my sisters used flashlights to find a place to hide. I put the blindfold on and counted to 30. When it was time, I said, "Ready or not, here I come." After walking around and touching every tree I passed, 10 minutes had already passed, and I still hadn't found my sisters. While I was walking on the trail, I could barely see anything, so I tripped on a twig and fell. My clothes got dirty, and my knees started bleeding, but I had no choice. I got up and walked around some more. I came across a tree and knew I had finally found something. It felt like a person. "Haha, found you," I said. But then I heard my sisters walking by behind me, saying, "Hey, how did you not find us yet?" At that moment, I froze. I took off my blindfold slowly and saw an old man sitting there, smiling at me while holding a knife. "Can I play with y'all?" he asked with a cracking voice. He wore a dirty shirt, and his hair looked like he hadn't showered in a long time. My sisters and I screamed and started running out of the forest as quickly as we could. While running, I looked back and noticed the man chasing us, swinging the knife in the air while laughing like a madman. I've never felt that kind of fear before, but after running for a while, the old man couldn't keep up. He stopped running, stared at us, and then turned around and went back into the forest. We got closer to our house and saw our dad pulling into the driveway. We ran to him and told him what just happened. He was shocked, so he called the police immediately. The police went to the forest and searched the area for a few hours. After a while, they found and arrested Ed, the old man. The next day, we learned that he had killed 4 young girls and dumped their bodies in the woods. All the local news stations were covering the incident. When I heard that, I felt sick to my stomach. I am glad that we are safe, but now I pray for the 4 souls of the children. May they rest in peace. I have a sister who got married when she was 18. She had a daughter named Susie, and her husband was unemployed. She worked 2 jobs to support herself, her daughter, and her husband. Every day, she left the house at 8 a.m. and only returned around 8 p.m. At that time, Susie had an imaginary friend named Dissa. Susie talked about her all the time. My sister even overheard her talking to Dissa, which creeped her out. After a while, my sister told Susie she was forbidden to mention Dissa when we visited Point one day. Susie told her mom, "Dissa is mad at you because you don't believe she's real. She comes to play with me when Daddy closes the closet door after you leave, and he lets her out before you come home." My sister had no idea this was happening. Her husband was supposed to be watching Susie during the day, but instead, he would lock her in the closet with a box of cereal and leave her there all day. When my sister discovered what was going on, she kicked her husband out. The poor little girl spent so much time alone locked in the closet that she conjured up an imaginary playmate. My sister divorced her husband and got custody of Susie. She decided to move out of the house they were renting. When the moving van came, the old man who owned the house came over to help them. He was talking to my sister and said, "I was always worried about your little girl on those basement stairs. My granddaughter fell down those stairs and broke her neck. She died in front of the closet down there." When my sister heard that, she got chills. "What was her name?" she asked. "It wasn't Dissa," the old man replied. "Her name was Jessica. She was only 4 years old. She couldn't say it properly. And how did you know that's how she said her name, Dissa?" My sister was in denial. She told him she didn't know what he was talking about, refused to discuss it, grabbed the last of her things, and left the house for good. Even today, we're still not allowed to talk about Susie or her imaginary friend Dissa. My sister remarried a few years later, and Susie got a great new stepdad. But when we speak alone, she always brings up that little girl and what she looked like. It still creeps me out to this day because I don't really believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but there's no way Susie could have known about that little girl. Who knows? Maybe they are real and maybe not. Every night, I hear my mother through the walls, but she never talks during the day, only at night. Like clockwork, she begins at midnight and abruptly stops at 6 a.m. I've heard everything from harsh whispers and playful talking to cackling and screaming. Some of the things frighten me. They are about dark and dreadful things. Whenever I enter her room to check on her, the silence is there. She just rocks in her chair. This is enough. I can't take it anymore. My mom has been suffering from seizures for the past few years, and they're getting worse. The doctor told me that she needed full-time care, so I volunteered, even though she has always been estranged and I hadn't seen her in a decade. I knew she needed me, so I thought it might be my last chance to stay with her, but it's gotten too much. She scares me. She doesn't even eat. I've tried and tried, but she doesn't open her mouth. I've tried to get her out of her bedroom or at least out of her chair, but she gets aggressive. So whenever she needs a bath, I bathe her right where she sits. She just rocks in her chair, mindlessly smiling at her closet. I have no idea what to do next. I'm about to go insane. I can handle caring for her during the day, but at night, I can't anymore. Finally, I went to the doctor for some help. I told him that she's been keeping me up at night with her whispering and talking, and that it's getting too much and she's starting to scare me. But his facial expression while looking at me was strange. He stared at me like he didn't understand what I was talking about. What the doctor said next scared me even more. "Well, I think you had a bad dream," he said. "Your mother bit her tongue off a few years ago. She can't talk at all. This happened when I was around 11 years old. One day, I was at my friend Kinsey's house, and my other friend Emma joined us too. It was a lazy weekend, so we decided to kill some time by baking cookies and doing other things. We all gathered in Kinsey's room and did our geometry homework, which was the main reason we were there. Soon, we got bored doing it since we were young teenage girls, so we jumped on the bed, watched YouTube and Netflix, and told each other scary stories. The one I'll never forget is Kinsey's story. She told me that the owner of the house was found murdered there, and she sometimes feels like someone lives in her closet. A few hours later, Kinsey's parents said they were going to a party and wouldn't be back until 6 o'clock in the morning. Kinsey didn't want to spend the night with her grandma and little sister, so she suggested having a sleepover. It sounded like a great idea, so we called each of our parents. It took a lot of convincing to get permission. When we got the okay, we changed into Kinsey's pajamas, got in bed, and watched something scary. It was almost 8 p.m. Kinsey's room was so messy it almost looked like a pig pen, so we decided to record a time-lapse of us cleaning. We were in the middle of cleaning the room when the doorbell suddenly rang. It was our pizza delivery. We all forgot to turn the camera off and left to eat. We sat in the living room, ate, and talked for a while. After we finished eating the pizza, we went back to her room. I realized we had left the camera on, but as I reached to grab my phone, I felt something anxious even though her room was very silent. So I told my friends to come closer. We all stood there and watched the video. As soon as we left, the window opened slowly and a man came inside. Then he ran into the bathroom. We all froze, knowing that someone was in the bathroom, which was connected to this room, but we tried not to make any noise. Then Kinsey told us we should leave the room, so we did just that. We went to her grandma's room with her little sister, locked the door, and called the police and Kinsey's parents. Thankfully, the police arrived in less than 5 minutes. When they arrived at the house, they went to Kinsey's room and found the man near the sink with a gun and a pocket knife, and they arrested him. It turns out he had been put in jail last week for raping young girls and then murdering them, but he escaped prison and tried to find another victim. I couldn't help but imagine what would have happened if I hadn't looked at the footage on my camera. To this day, I hate going to sleepovers. Now I'm 16, and I heard that the man escaped again after killing the security guards. I hope he's not looking for me or my friends. This story takes place in South Africa, my home country. It happened last year during July, right after I turned 18. I had a 3-week holiday before I had to go back to school, and my sister decided to take me and a few friends to KwaZulu-Natal for a trip to a mountain range. It was me, my sister Kate, and my 3 friends, Ashley, May, and Tanya. The last place we visited before heading to the cold mountain range was a site called Isandlwana, where the Shaka Zulu army fought the British with many fatalities. We got to the place around midnight. Since there was no security, we decided to explore the grounds and look at the thousands of graves scattered around the land. It wasn't until after I suggested we give it a rest and find a place to stay for the night that my sister pulled a box out of her bag. It was an infamous Ouija board. We used to believe in the paranormal, so all 5 of us decided to play. I mean, it was such a perfect place to do it. We sat down by one of the bigger graves and started playing, but the board wasn't really doing anything until my sister lost her temper and took her fingers off the planchette. It started moving around in short circles before going over the letters and spelling out RUNTHEYAREHERE. At first, we were all kind of laughing. We weren't really scared because we had a lot of alcohol before playing and thought it was one of the girls doing it. However, all of a sudden, Ashley stood up, cried out in pain, and claimed something was stabbing her. "Help! Help me!" she screamed. So we immediately stopped playing and went to help her. When she lifted her shirt, we could see a long, deep scratch that went from where her heart is down to her stomach. We were all shocked, so we left in a hurry since the nearest clinic was over an hour away. When we arrived, our situation only got worse. Considering we were a group of white girls who only knew how to speak English and a bit of Dutch, and everyone inside the clinic was Zulu native and didn't know any English, we couldn't get my friend any help until we lifted her shirt to show them the wound. Eventually, one nurse sterilized her and bandaged her up. However, surprisingly, the next morning when we woke up inside my sister's van, Ashley was no longer wounded. It was as if the event had never happened. Someone later told us that it might be a Zulu tradition to cut their enemies' hearts from their bodies as a mark of respect for the dead, preparing them for the afterlife. But who knows? Now, over a year later, none of us truly know what happened. I go to university, and they are still my only friends. The memory becomes more and more distant over time, and I sometimes believe we all just hallucinated. But one thing is for sure, I will never, ever touch a Ouija board again.